How are you guys doing? All right? I want to get to introducing our first presenter. His name is Marc Urselli, and he's hanging out in the wings back there. Can we give a round of applause to Marc? Clearly, you guys have heard of Marc, so I don't need to say a lot, but I got it. Marc Urselli, I think he's been nominated for Grammys 5 times and has won 3 times. Marc is a terrific career up into this date. He's worked with a lot of really kind of experimental artists where kind of experimental meets accessible. I mean, he's worked with Lou Reed, Nick Cave, Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth, Mike Patton of Faith No More. Today, he's going to be presenting a mix from a really heavy band called O.R.k, and we're really excited to hear this one. He's going to take us under the hood of a real working mix and show you his process, the tools he uses, how he thinks about approaching the mix. And Marc, not only has he been engineering for a long time, but he's been teaching this stuff for a long time too. So I think we're in really good hands with Marc. A couple big thank yous I want to give. One to the Manhattan Center for having us here and letting us check out their studios. Can we give a round of applause one more time to the Manhattan Center? Super psyched that you can be here. And I also want to give big thanks to McDSP. For each of these events, we have a sponsor. And the sponsors are the reasons that we can give you guys free tickets to come and check this out, and that we can have free video afterwards. So big thanks to McDSP for sponsoring this. Can we give a round of applause to McDSP as well? Marc is going to be using a lot of their tools and others to take us through his mix. Let's have me stop talking and give a warm welcome to Marc Urselli.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, Justin. So, first of all, I want to also thank Justin Coletti, Paolo De Gregorio, and David Weiss from SonicScoop, and the Deli for having me here. I want to thank Pete Oslin with the Hammerstein Ballroom, or the Manhattan Center, I don't know what to call it, for having us here. It's a beautiful room. I want to thank McDSP, Colin McDowell there, and all the other plug-in makers that have us all here. So today, we're going to talk about the heavy mix. I do a lot of different kind of mixes and work with a lot of different kind of people. And these are some of the people I worked with. And the thing I'm most proud about in this list is not a specific artist, because I'm a big fan of a lot of those artists, but the diversity. I'm really all about diversity. Niche is great, and I'm going to talk about niche versus diversity, but I do like working with different kinds of styles. It's really the main reason why I became a mixing engineer, recording engineer, because when I was playing in bands, age 15 to 17, 18, I couldn't really figure out what genre to play, so I joined a metal band, and I joined a hip-hop band or a rock band, whatever. So this allowed me to work with all these different kind of people and different kind of genres and not have to pigeonhole myself in one genre. And so you'll see there's a lot of rock and metal. We're going to talk about that mostly today. Pop, singer-songwriter, jazz, blues, world music, experimental, new music. I do a lot of that. And the reason why it says John Zorn 4 times 70 is because I've made, to this day, the last one was yesterday, 73 records with just John Zorn alone. That's one guy. That's a testament to him more than to me. I just press record and mix him. But yeah, that's basically some of that. These are the 3 things I want to talk about today, other than showing you how to mix one of these things. Analog and digital, and it's not an analog versus digital. For me, it's an analog plus digital. I'm a child of the mixture of the two. I love hybrid. So, for example, I work in a recording studio called East Side Sound in the Lower East Side of New York City. It's been there for 45 years this year. We have an analog console with digital control and digital recall. So there's one example of the hybrid of the two worlds joining. Now, because I work in that beautiful studio, and I'm happy and lucky to do so, I get to do most of the stuff that I mix these days on an analog console, even though it has digital recall, digital automation. But obviously today we're going to talk about a mix in the box. But really, I think it's the crossroads of those two worlds together that give us the greatest opportunities today. So whether it translates to a home setup, which I know most of you might be more interested in than an old school analog studio, in maybe having an analog summing box along with your digital I/O. I think that's really where magic happens, is when you can take advantage of all the powerful tools and the power of flexibility of digital along with the sound of analog. Studio versus live is something I wrote on there because I do both. I'm a live sound mixing engineer and a studio mixing and recording engineer. And the reason why I mention this is because I've successfully, in the years, incorporated a lot of studio techniques into my live mixing process and vice versa. Some things that I've learned while live mixing, I've then applied in the studio. And so, again, it's, niche versus versatility is kind of all of these things together. You can absolutely decide this is what I'm going to do, and there's a great advantage to that, which is primarily the fact that people are going to get to know you much quicker. They're going to know, oh, that's the guy that does all of that. I'm going to call him because this is what I'm doing. But if you are able to learn from different worlds and apply all of that knowledge into one place, into one knowledge that encompasses all of those opportunities, then I think you have the fifth gear that everyone is looking for. And that's basically why I like to not be pigeonholed in one genre, even though today we'll do the heavy mix, but I also like to, not only genre-wise, but technology-wise and experience-wise, work in different kind of worlds. Less is more is one of the three main things that I'm going to try to drive home today, except when it's not, because obviously if the client calls you and says, I need more snare, you're not going to be like, well, really, less is more, so we're going to do this mix with less snare. But no, less is more because I'm a fan of keeping things simple and streamlined. Now, you can have 1,000 plugins, you can have 1,000 tracks, you can have 6 kick drums in the same songs. These are some of the things that I've received in the mail. Doesn't really mean that it makes it better, because those 6 kick drums are going to give you some phase issues, even, et cetera, et cetera. There's always a reason why I could say less is more. But if you keep it simple, you're going to have the most amount of fun doing what you do. We had this conversation with Pete from the Hammerstein when Pete mixed AC/DC, something I'm jealous of and I didn't get to do. He was telling me how easy and great sounding they were, and why, in his opinion, that was because there were 4 people on stage. So if you have 4 people on stage, I just went to see U2 the other night at MetLife, same thing. You have 4 people, the amount of power out of those 4 guys is so massive, and it's not just because they have a big PA, it's because there's 1 kick drum and 1 bass and whatever, 2 guitars. That doesn't mean that you should always do that you shouldn't do overdubs, for example. I'm not advocating that. It just means that if you keep in mind what the end result should be, you can use that to not be distracted by the possibilities of having too much going on, whether it's number of tracks or whatnot. The other point I want to make is this, and this is really my personal philosophy. Everything that I do in a mix has a reason, and I do it for a specific reason. I don't really do things just to do them. I mean, I'm all about experimentation, and I do experiment, but once I've decided what I'm going to do it because it has a reason and a purpose. So if at any point today you have a question, I don't know if we're set up to do questions during or only after, but feel free to ask, because chances are, if you see something on my screen, it's because there's a reason. If you see a certain routing that you don't understand, there's most likely a reason for it, and it's not just there by chance. And then the last point I'm going to make is this. That might be because I was born in Switzerland, but organization is absolutely key in everything I do. My mixing sessions are nicely organized, whether that means color, it means naming, it means everything. And the reason why that's so important is because I do like sometimes I work on 4 or 5 records in the same week. If I don't keep things organized, even down to where it's stored, where it's backed up, where the backup of the backup is, I'm not going to know by the end of the week what I'm doing. So that's a session that I mixed a couple months ago. It's less than 4 minutes long, and it has less than 10 tracks. So, even if you're not that organized, you're not going to get lost in that. But in the same week I was mixing that, I was mixing this. Now, if I'm not organized in this, I'm going to get lost very, very quickly. That's more than 120 tracks. I don't know if you can see it, but you can see it up here in the bottom left. And that's more than 80 minutes long. It's because it's an opera piece by Du Yun, Chinese composer, which actually won a Pulitzer Prize for this. So again, organization is absolutely key. So today, I'm going to show you 2 things. I'm going to show you the template that I've made for myself to mix in the box, of course. And then we're going to open a session by a great band that I think you're going to enjoy if you're here at this panel, even if you don't know the band. So the template that I'm going to show you is something that I've put together in the last maybe 10 years, ever since I started mixing in the box. I'm very proud of this template because it has a lot going on, and it allows me at any point to start a mix and know that I can get anywhere I need to go with that mix, regardless of what questions or requests are coming from the artist. So my template is ready for 5.1, it's ready for stems, it's ready for anything that the client might ask. And a lot of the things are inactive in it, and I just make them active as I go. But the fact that it's all there ready puts me in a position to be ready for whatever I need to do, and puts me in a position to be versatile and flexible while still keeping all my stuff organized. The reason, this is my template right here. The reason why I have a 4.3, it's because I've been working on this for 10 years. Every time I make an adjustment to it, I make a new version of it so that if I need to go back to an old template or something I'm doing in my current template doesn't work, I still have that option. So when I receive a mix from clients, the first thing that I do is, if it comes from Pro Tools, if it's a Pro Tools session, obviously I don't need to do much to it. But if it's a Logic session, the first thing that I do is I use this software called Stereo Monoizer, which I recommend you use, because a lot of people that use Logic and send me their tracks will send me stereo tracks of everything, even though it's a mono kick drum. And so that's a software that will allow you to just drag all of those tracks in here. It will check phase and stereo image of the files, and depending on the settings, it will spit out mono of everything if it's a mono track, and it'll keep it stereo, of course, if it's a stereo track. I'll show you later. We'll open a session, and I'll show you my process in doing that. But I'm going to start with the template. I'm going to open that and show you what it is that I do. So this is my template. As you can, I'll make it smaller so you can see all the tracks. It basically has your regular, sort of what would be your groups or VCAs in a session or on a mixing desk. And then it has a couple of extra things, which are this print VCA and this PC VCA. Print is basically a VCA. You guys are familiar with VCAs, I assume, but if you're not, VCAs are a way for you to control multiple tracks in Pro Tools without having to adjust volumes on all those tracks individually, so, or even as a group. So you can make a group, assign a VCA to a group, and then you can change the volume of everything. The reason why it's called print is because that's going to be the level that I send to the final mix, to the final print. And the reason why that's important is because the final print has some degree of compression, and I want to make sure that I don't push the compressor too hard or that I push it hard enough, so to speak. PC is my VCA for parallel compression, if and when I do that. I don't do it all the time. And then, like I said, these are all the tracks. There's a sign track. That's for when I use sine waves to fatten up kick drums, something that I do often but not always. And then there's reverb returns for drums, reverb returns for instruments, for vocals, for background vocals, delay returns, effect buses, and then there's these four final tracks, which are basically 2 aux tracks and 2 tracks that I print my mix to. Now, what's important about this and why I do this is because there's always going to be a mix that's a reference, which is what I send to clients, and then there's a mix that I send to mastering engineers, which has to give them enough headroom and therefore is a lot quieter. So Mac DSP, which sponsors this panel, makes this ML4000, which is a multi-band limiter basically, which I use on the final stage. And then, as you can see, I don't know if you can see the threshold on the 2. I mean, this is just a factory default, but what I usually do is I start with a threshold of -10 on one and then of half on the other. And again, that can change, and it can also change with the level of the print VCA. So basically, to be clear, all of these tracks that you see in green, they all sum to these 2 buses at the bottom. That's why there's that sigma in the name. The sigma sign in Greek is the sign for sum. And that's why those are my 2 summing buses, that and that, which print. Now, let's talk about plugins. Plugins are, of course, everyone's favorite tool. And so, as you can see, I have many. They're all inactive because what I do is I import this template into whatever mix I'm doing, and then I decide based on the music, the genre, what the track needs, what to use. So I'm going to have different choices of reverb for drums. I'm making these all active for you guys, but obviously it would only be one or the other. So I have Avid Space, I have Revolver by Mac DSP, and I have the Waves Abbey Road plates. So these are 3 of the reverbs that I use most often. For the instruments, and by the way, less is more, meaning I'm a fan of keeping the reverb counts to minimum. I'm not really a fan of using one different reverb for everything. Sometimes that works, but if I think about things in terms of what it would sound like if I was doing this in the room, and if I was doing this in the one room, which a lot of my recordings are this day still, it's like there would be 1 reverb or 2. There wouldn't be like 10 different reverbs. So for the instrumental tracks, which can be whatever, saxophones, guitars, whatever, I have, again, my revolvers with different settings. And then for the vocals, I usually start from a revolver as well. So I'm making them all active so that you guys can see what's happening. Lead vocal, some de-essing, always useful, almost always useful. Then there's my delay vocal chain, which it's not really a chain, it's one or the other, but a lot of these plugins are plugins that allow you to really hone in on what kind of delay you want to do. Sometimes, more often than not, I just want to repeat. So I don't go fancy. I just use Avid's great delay, because if I just want a repetition of a word, if not, I don't need to go all out. But if I want something all out, or spacies, Echo Boy by Sound Toys is one of my favorite. This I just recently purchased and haven't used much, but I'm a fan of tape delays, so that's a great tape delay by Waves. Crystallizer is another thing when you want to have really spatial effects with delays or whatnot. And then this is a multi-delay also by Avid. Same thing will be here on the delay of the background vocals. And then ultimately there's my 2 effect channels. These are basically wildcards that I use when I want to have a special effect on something. And really, my first choice for that is the great effect track by Sound Toys. Really, if a client says, go creative on this mix, or give me some crazy delays, or give me some crazy effects, that's my first choice, because really, you can't go wrong with that. But there's many others that I also use. I'm going to make some of these active. Again, some of that. This is another company I really like. It's called Melba Productions. It's a German company that makes great plugins. Stutter Edit, Isotope, one of my favorite for special like breakdown effects and things like that. A little bit of Enigma. And then my other delay that I like, I mean not delay, plugin that I like is this. You saw I just made this active and it starts counting. That's because I want to be honest to my customers. So when my client asks me to charge them by the hour, I run this. So anytime I work on this session, whatever session it is, it's going to start counting down, and I'll know exactly how much time I've spent on this mix. This plugin is made by a company called Hofa, also a German company. I use their plugins mostly for mastering. When I do mastering, which, you know, I'm primarily a mixing engineer, but these days doing some mastering as well. They have a software that allows you to make a DDP master, which is the final stage after your mix. The ML8000, which is the big brother of the ML4000, is an 8-band multi-band limiter. If I need a little bit, usually the ML4000 does the trick for me, but if I need a little bit more control over something, then I use the ML4000. So that's my basic template to start a mix with any song. I'm going to show you the rest of the tracks that are currently inactive so you see what other possibilities I'm reserving myself. These yellow tracks here are the stem tracks. So when a client wants stems, then I have this already ready so that I can send to all these yellow tracks here, currently inactive. And again, stem bus here, all of these. These are already pre-routed for recording just what the track says. So the drum stem will just record the output of this drum track up here. Okay? The way I do that is with the additional sends. So if you look at these additional send routings, that's where I'm doing all my stem routings. So it says here drum stem because I got this drum bus going to this drum stem track. And then all of these, I'll make these active real quick so you guys can see them. All of these Sigma called tracks are making TV mixes and instrumental mixes. So when I'm done with a mix and the client has approved it, I can simply record enable these tracks, press record, and in one pass make all my stems, make all my instrumental mixes, make all my a cappella mixes, make all my TV mixes in one pass. I don't need to rerun everything. I don't need to commit. I can just press record and have everything done at the same time. And then these blue tracks at the bottom are my 5-1 tracks ready to go. Obviously, this is, you can't really do it on a 2-track setup like we're doing here, but I'm ready for that. I can make your front, your back, your sub, everything from one template. I load this in, the tracks that I don't need will stay inactive, the tracks that I do need I'll make active, and I can do everything the client wants. I'm going to show you the input-output setup for this, because like I said earlier, everything has a reason. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. For example, I have 128 buses. Do I need 128 buses? No, nobody in their right mind does. But I'll show you why I have 128 buses. When I have a track, I just made a new track, I'm going to want to send this track to one of my buses, whether it's a drum bus, if it's a drum track, or the percussion bus, if it's a percussion track. Now, if you make 128 buses in your I/O setup, when you go here, you'll see them all here. And the advantage of that is that I can simply go to my second page and have all the buses that I have set up for me. If I didn't do the 128 tracks, I would see only the first of these two menus, and then I would have to roll down here and look for mine and go back up, because I probably went past it, until I find my drum bus. That's one trick of why everything has a reason. I open this, I ignore the 1 through 128. I only use those if I do some other stuff that it's not already covered by my template, but my template covers everything I need to do. Here's all my buses. So if the audio 1 track that I'm currently working on is a bass, I'm going to send it to my bass bass bus, which is also going to my bass stem, so that everything is constantly wired up and working. That's one example. Back to the I/O. Another thing that I've done is using little special characters to make it easy for me to identify something without having to look in on my computer. So I told you about the sigma symbol for summing stuff, but I've also used the circled P and the circled C of copyright for my parallel compression. I've used the circled R of the registered trademark for all my reverbs, and this little 3-star symbol that I have no idea what that is, but that's my delay symbol. The reason I do that is because when I'm in the track, I often work in, you can work with different zoom levels, but I work with small. I like that, so I don't have to scroll too far between the 100 tracks that I'm usually sent. So let's say this audio 1 track is what I'm currently working on, and I want to send it to a reverb. When I send that to one of my reverbs, let's say it's an instrument, and I'm going to send it to the reverb instrument. When the track is small, all I'm going to see is the R. So I know that that's a reverb send, not a delay send. If I'm also sending it to a delay send, that little star symbol that I had, I see the 3 little stars. So by naming my I/O setup in that way, I can see instantly if it's a reverb or if it's a delay or what other instrument it is. If I'm sending it to that special effect bus that I was telling you about, then obviously I'll see the first letter effects. But that allows me to, at a glance, know whether on that track I have a reverb, I have a delay, or I have something else, and what that might be. Same goes for those stem tracks and for the parallel compression tracks and the stem tracks. And I have this little arrow here at the end of those. I have these kind of arrows at the beginning of the 5/1. All of that translates into being able to see what's going on. Oh, and I have the little note symbol on the output, as you can see. That means that that's an output that will actually make music. Everything else is internal. It's digital. It doesn't make music until I see the little symbol, which I've added in the I/O setup. And then here, again, this will make music, and it's the sum of everything. That's just an example of how I use different characters to make my mix readable to me at a glance. Another thing that I do, because I said everything has a reason, is prepare these 2 tracks in the way they are. You'll see they're the only tracks here that I'm going to hide these real quick so you guys can see these real well. These are my 4 main tracks that I record to. And as you can see, it says NC mix V.01, and the bottom one says C mix V.01. The reason why I have the .01 is because that's going to be the first mix that I send the client when I'm happy with it. When the client sends me requests for changes that I need to do, I'm going to save my mix as mix 2, and I'm going to, on these 2 tracks, create a new playlist, and this will automatically say V.02. So I don't have to rename everything because it's already named correctly. By the way, NC means non-compressed, C means compressed. That's just my way of calling things. So let's say the song is called Song 1. I'm going to call that Song 1. I'm going to call that song 1. So now this and this have the names song 1 non-compressed mix version 1, song 1 compressed mixed version 1. When I make a new mix, the song title will stay there. Nothing will change except the version number of my mix. And then I can easily just export that to an MP3, send it to the client, and everyone's happy. Any questions about that before I move on? Yes? Very good question. The question for those in the back who haven't heard it is how I handle reverbs assigned to multiple instruments, say a drum and a guitar, when I run stems. It's an exception, and to answer your question, I'll have to run those separately. But the reason why I have those set up that way is that I have a reverb specifically for drums, and so I'm never going to put that on the guitar. And then I have a reverb specifically for instruments, which is going to go on everything else. But the truth of the matter is I'm not going to add reverb to everything, and so usually the instrumental reverb that I have set up is probably only used on the guitars or whatever, the percussion, something. And if it's a chance where I use the same reverb for, say, the percussions and the guitars, then I'll rerun one or the other after I've done the final pass. But it usually doesn't happen. I also have, by the way, a reverb stem here when I run the stems. So I can actually run those reverbs, run those tracks dry, and also run the reverbs for posterity. Yes? Everyone heard it in the back, or should I repeat it? Repeat it. So he was asking how to handle levels of mixes that I send to clients and that I send to mastering engineers, because he was running into a problem of sending tracks that are too hot for mastering engineers, and how to handle that, correct? The answer to that is these two buses right here. The first one, the two selected tracks, will handle my mix that goes to the mastering engineer. And so if I'm using the ML4000, I'm going to have this threshold set much lower than on the next two tracks, which are these two selected now, where my ML4000 is set at -10. So I'm compressing this a lot more. This is the mix and this is the one called with a C for compressed. This is the one that I'm going to send to the client.
So that's an approximation of what the mastering.
Exactly. What I'm sending to the client is a nice and hot mix that's going to give him a good idea of what a mastered mix will sound. It's not meant to replace the mastered mix, although there have been instances where clients of mine have gotten it mastered and was like, I like your mix better. I was like, use it. You know, it's there. If you like it, you're the only judge of that. But in general, I make the two mixes so that the client can hear what it will sound like. For two reasons. A, you have the client that goes like, oh, I just put it in my iTunes and it doesn't sound as hot as the Jay-Z track. You know, that's why I send them the hot track. And B, more importantly, sometimes you'll send your mix to to a mastering engineer. He'll do his mastering, and that will really alter the balances of the instruments within your mix. So if you give the client a mastering preview of what the mix will be, they'll already know how compression will apply to the different instruments in the mix. Because if they don't hear that, you know, the resulting dynamic of a non-compressed mix might give you a different impression of what the mix is. I'm actually listening to the hot mix because I want to know how the decisions that I make will play out in the final stages. And so if you noticed here, there's two things that you can notice. One is that my non-compressed track, output track, is muted, and I even have the volume down. The reason why I do that is because I found myself sometimes during mixing, like muting a bunch of things and then option unmuting, and then everything unmutes, including that one track that I don't want to hear. Because if I do hear that, it sums with this, and obviously it distorts everything. So as a double safety, I have it muted, and I have the level down. So yes, I mix by monitoring my compressed mix the whole time. Eventually, I'll check it at the end, but the actual decisions I make by monitoring the compressed mix so that I know how my moves will translate. If I'm mixing at home or in the studio, in both instances, I use speakers that I've had professionally calibrated. And I use them with or without sub. At the studio, I have 3 pairs. At home, I have 2 pairs. One pair has a subwoofer, the other pair doesn't. And I make sure that my decisions are, as correct as they can be in an untreated space, which is my home. Obviously, the studio is treated.
How loud do you mix?
Very low. The question is, how loud do I mix? I mix very low for 2 reasons. A, obviously, I don't want to go deaf. And B, my mixes, mixes in general will be more, how can I put that? The human ear acts like a compressor. It's the only organism, biological organism that acts like a compressor. If you send it too much volume, it will compress what you're hearing. I don't want that. I want to hear my mix uncompressed. I'm already compressing it. I don't need my human ear to overcompress. So if you mix low, and I'm not saying I'm never going to turn up the volume. It's especially important when you're mixing low end, because low end, like kick and bass, you can't really feel or hear the same way as when you have a subwoofer or when you have it turned up. So I'll start my mix, if it's a drum, if it's a rock band with drums and bass, etc., I'll start it loud. I'll get my kick and bass balance. I'll add the drums. At that point, I will turn it down, and I will stay at that low level the whole mix, whether it's 2 hours, whether it's 10 hours. I will stay at that low level, and it's especially important for ear fatigue, because if I'm mixing a song for 10 hours, my judgment is going to be clouded by the 9th hour, or by the 3rd, really, if I'm mixing at a loud volume. So yes, by all means, mix low. You'll hear everything better. You will not be changing your perception with the compression that your human ear adds, and you'll last longer, not just that day, but in life. I don't know, honestly, I don't know if there's a difference between bouncing and printing. I didn't know there was an argument about that. I would assume that it sounds the same, so I didn't know if there's different people that think otherwise. I always print for 2 reasons. Number 1 is that I'll end up with 2 down here on this track, and on this track, I'll end up with 2 waveforms, which will give me visual feedback as to whether I'm compressing too much. If I start seeing everything squared off, even if it sounds good, that's too much. You don't want to see a block of, square waveforms. So I'll turn my threshold, a little bit. And the other reason why I print is because if I'm mixing that 80-minute song that I was showing you before on the screenshot, and the client wants a change at minute 75, I don't have to reprint the whole 75, 80-minute long piece. I can just print from minute 74 to minute 78, whatever section the client wants a change on. And then I can crossfade, consolidate, and I have a finished mix. Now, this argument is a little bit less important today that you have that you're able to commit the tracks on Pro Tools 12 or whenever that started. But until Pro Tools came up with that feature, with the commit feature, you had to reprint the whole thing in real time. And so imagine how many passes of that 80-minute opera that I mixed I had to do, how many times I would have had to. If the client asks for 7 changes, 8 times 7, that's like, hours and hours just printing mixes. So that's, obviously, if the client wants the whole violin up in the whole opera, then you have to reprint it anyway. But that's why I print. I have the multiband limiter is set to minus 0.5. So that's my very upper limit. I never go to 0, if that answers your question. But on the non-compressed version, I don't even approximate that. That's really just my safety ceiling. The reason why I have minus 0.5 is I went to this great panel at the last AES in New York, I forget the guy's name, but he made a demonstration as to how tracks that are sent at 0 dB, mastered at 0 dB, will end up on streaming services like Spotify, etc., and will sound worse than tracks that are mastered or the ceiling is minus 0.5. Since that panel, which was 2 Octobers ago, I started putting that as my ceiling for everything. I don't go to 0 dB anymore. If the client wants to go to 0 dB with the mastering engineer, that's with them. But I want to make sure that if my mix doesn't get mastered and goes to iTunes and whatnot, sounds as good as possible. So that hence that ceiling. But to better answer your question, when I open the song, you will see what the two waveforms look like, and you'll see that on the non-compressed version, I actually don't push that hard at all. That's for the mastering engineer to decide, and I primarily look at the waveform, but also look at the gain reduction meter in the ML4000 or whatever I'm using as my final stage. So on my compressed version, this will go down to probably around here, -4, but on the non-compressed version, I barely want to see that. Like, I don't want to see gain reduction kick in at all. And the reason I still have it on is just so I have the safety of not ever going above 0.05, but really I'm not doing much gain reduction at all on that mix. Well, this is why I have the print VCA. The first thing I'll do is once I import my template into the song that I'm mixing, first thing I'll do is I'll make an all group that has all the tracks, all of them. I'll assign that to this print VCA, and then if it's hitting anything too hard, before I even start mixing, I can take everything down. And I want to make sure that way I can always control my gain stage at any point. So I don't want to start usually I start at -10 on all the tracks. That way I know I have headroom. If I find myself pushing too hard against that headroom, then I'll enable that, I'll use that print VCA to bring everything down a little bit more. And another thing, since you mentioned that on our show, is that I have an extra safety net in the inserts F through J. I keep those hidden because I don't use them much, but if I do want the extra ceiling of protection, in my inserts F through J, I have my favorite compressor, which is Mac DSP's channel G, set at a very, very small ratio of 2:1. You can see where my mouse is, and a threshold of -6. So basically, I'm barely compressing, but those instances that I've just multi-enabled are on all my buses. So drums, percussion, bass, guitars, keys, strings, horns, vocals, whatever is on the track. By the way, obviously not every track I mix has strings and horns, so I'll delete or make inactive whatever tracks I'm not using. So that's an extra, to answer the gain staging question, that's an extra step that I take in making sure I never go too hard on any of these buses individually. The reason why this is also important is because when I'm eventually, where in the comments it says drums, stems, that's creating a stem. So I want to make sure that stem is not going to be distorted on its own. So that's why I also have that extra channel G when I'm making stems. These tracks that are currently inactive here, which where all the names have the word PC in it, that's for parallel compression. I don't do parallel compression all the time, but when I do, these lightly shaded, light green shaded tracks are already ready for me to do the parallel compression. So if I want to enable these, I can make them active. Let's say I want to I'll just enable them all, but let's say I want to do parallel compression on the drums. I already have this this you see on sends A through E. I have on all of those tracks, I have sends ready for that. Again, I want everything ready to go. I don't want to waste time thinking about routing. That's why I spent so much time on this template throughout the years. So I want to do parallel compression on drums, great. I'm going to make this PC drums track active. I'm going to make this send active, the PC drums send. This is the amount that I'm sending to the parallel compression bus, which is right underneath, and then I choose how to do my parallel compression. And again, I have a slew of plugins that I like for that. I have the Mac DSP Ultimate I think it's called Ultimate Channel Strip. Then I have this, also by Mac DSP, MC404. I have Soundtoys Decapitator, which is great for parallel compression. I really like that. I have the Ozone 7, and I have the Dynamics limiter by that German company Melba Productions that I mentioned. These are all my favorite compression plugins that I use for parallel compression only, although my favorite compressor for a regular channel is usually the channel G. And to that extent, I want to show you something else which is really cool. Some of you might not know, but there's 2 places in Pro Tools where you can set up a preferred plugin that you use all the time. Will show up here. So these are my 2 plugins that I use the most on any session. Channel G is my Mac DSP, has everything: compressor, gate, equalization, high pass, low pass. So I can do anything that I need to do on any regular track, I do on that. And then I really like this M Dynamic EQ made by Melba Productions. The reason I like it, it's hard to demonstrate without audio, but if I had any audio, you would see basically, you can choose to see a sonogram or just an analyzer, and you can see that here and then choose the band that you want to compress or excite, by what degree you want to compress, and this is an active compressor. Mac DSP also makes one that I just got from them and I'm testing out. But until I use that full time, this has been my go-to, and it's really great because of the visual feedback you get. You'll see on this analyzer, you'll see 2 actually waveforms. One is the one, not waveform, but whatever you call what comes out of an analyzer. You'll see the one that's before and the one that's after, and you'll see how the active EQing that you're doing affects the way the signal that you're sending in. Yes?
So this is all in the box, but if you're actually tracking a band or an artist, are you using hardware to print?
Well, the question is, this is all in the box if I'm using hardware to track a band. Well, first of all, I'm going to say that when I track, I'm a purist. I'm for least amount of signal possible, shortest signal path possible. So when I track, I go mic, preamp, Pro Tools. I don't even go through the console for my printing of the tracks. I will go through the console for the analog summing of all the returns of Pro Tools. So I'm summing through the console, and if I'm summing through the console, I'll also do some EQing on the console, but I print as cleanly as, I record as cleanly as possible so that I don't make any decisions that I might regret later. Yes?
Just so we're all on the same page, what is your zero? How far below digital zero are you?
When I'm mixing in the box? Let me open a song and I'll show you that. Because it's easier to answer these questions by showing you. I'm going to open this song twice because we're running short on time, but I want to show you the 2 versions that I was sent. This is the version, this is basically what the band sent me before I did anything to it. And the reason I'm opening that is to answering the gentleman's question over there. If it's like I said, I'll use a stereo monoizer if it's a session, if it's tracks from Logic. But if it's tracks that I'm sent like this, the first thing I do is to look at what the band, the group, the artist has Do they have plugins on the Pro Tools session? Do they have inserts? Do they have volume moves? Do they have mute automation? Anything like that. Sometimes I've opened sessions where, there was something they didn't want and they didn't shade it. They just made mute automation, and then I'd make the mix with something that they didn't want. I was like, you sent it to me. It's like, yeah, but it was muted. And I look at the tracks and it's not muted, but it's got some weird mute automation, whatever. So the first thing I do is I scroll through volume. I do that. I'll make my waveform as small as possible so that if there is a volume automation of any kind, I know it's there. I'll look at the mute, I'll look at the pans. After I looked all of that, assuming all those lines are straight, to answer your question, I know the band hasn't done anything that they want me to maintain. If I see any volume automation, I'll make a judgment of whether it's a volume automation I want to keep or not. And why do I want to keep it? Because if it's just volume automation, say to make the guitar solo louder, I'll redo that myself. But if it's some kind of weird, special effect automation that the artist is really attached to, I'll ask, do you want me to do that exactly the way you have it? Are you attached to that, or are you open to other things, whatnot? If they say they're attached to it, then I'll know that when I import my template, that's the one track that I don't want to alter the volume for. Once that's done, I set everything to no output. And by saying once that's done, I mean once I see that there's no automation of any kind that I need to retain, and if there is, I'll make sure I do retain it. I'll set all my outputs and inputs to no input and no output. That way I can start fresh. And then I'll click on that last track. The reason I do that is because when I import my template, it will go there after that track. I click on Import Session Data As. I'll click on that. I'll click on Option All. This will import all these tracks. And that's when I can really start mixing. Now, of course, I've saved my template, so it will have all those plugins made active. But the point is, when I open that, it will start with everything inactive, with these yellow tracks hidden. Those are my tracks. I saved the template. I shouldn't have, but it's okay. I have backups for everything. But the point is, I would see just the green tracks come up and my two bus tracks come up. This is kind of what I would see with all the plugins made inactive. And then I can start mixing. What I do is I select all the drums. I go here. I see my drums. And I can start working on stuff. Okay, so this is now the same mix that I'm going to be opening after I've done all of that. This is a band called O.R.k that I'm going to play. I'll play the track first. You guys can rock out to it, and then we'll discuss what questions you have. The band is called O.R.k. They're a great band that if you don't know, you should check out. It's Pat Mastalotto from King Crimson on drums, Colin Edwin from Porcupine Tree on bass, this guitar player called Carmelo Pipituan, which he plays with a band called Marta sui tubi in Italy, pretty popular there. I don't blame you for not knowing them here in the States. And the singer's name is his name is Lef, or Lorenzo Esposito Fornazzari. He played in a band called O.R.k. So the four of them got together. This is their second record. It came out 2 months ago. The song is called Dirty Rain. The record is called Soul of an Octopus. Came out on a British label called Rare Noise. And it's a really good band. And this is it.
Just and shrill, broken down, road to heal. the soul, be washed in gold. This mighty rain wiped it out. My black old dreams won't take you back. Lost concealed, now revealed, layers spill and truth reveals. From the rapture, the dance is real, broken down the road to heal. Shut the fuck up. Stand road to soul, be washed in gold. This mighty rain wiped it out. This is the time. Black old dreams washed in gold, eyes shut. A dirty rain wipes me out. Black old dreams washed in gold, eyes shut. A dirty rain wipes me out. Black old dreams washed in gold, eyes shut. A dirty rain wipes me out. A dirty rain wipes me out.
So, the first, thank you. You should check out this record because it's a really great record. So the first thing I did, or at least in this track, when mixing drums, is I made sure that they're in phase, so that there's no kind of phase cancellation happening. For that, I use this plugin called M-Auto Align, made by Melba Productions. It's a great plugin. There's a couple of plugins out there that do this. So I have this plugin across all the tracks, and then I have my faithful channel G across all the tracks, doing whatever I needed to do on all the separate tracks of this drum set. This is one of the rare, I don't want to say rare cases, but these days I record most of the stuff that I mix because I work in this beautiful studio downtown in New York called Eastside Sound. This is one example where I didn't record the tracks. I think Pat from King Crimson recorded the drums at his home studio because he lives in Austin and the bass player lives in the UK and the other two live in Italy. So it's definitely one of those projects that came across, came together across the ocean. When I don't record the stuff myself, which is the point I'm trying to make, I'm even more careful making sure stuff is phase coherent, phase aligned. Because when I do record it myself, I'll take precautions to make sure that everything is in phase. So, this is the drum. And you'll see I have a little bit of reverb on the snare and a little bit of reverb on the hi-hat. And I have this sine wave on the kick and on the floor tom. And that's really all there is to this, other than, of course, the equalization that I did through the channel G on the different sections of the drums. I'm a big fan of muting toms with sidechaining to make sure that you're muting based on frequency and not just on level, so you don't miss hits. So that's why that looks like that it's kind of weird looking, because it looks like I'm cutting off all the high end at around 150, which is obviously not true. That's just the sidechain filter for the gate. There's a little bit of electronics on this track. There's bass. There's this bass delay at the beginning, which they printed because they were happy with it. That's just the intro and the middle part. Bunch of guitar tracks. Less is more, as I said at the beginning. As you can see, very minimal automation. The most busy automation you see, this one, is just the reverb send to make sure that, or the delay send to make sure that I'm hearing the delays on the words that I want to hear repeated and not just on everything. But other than that, it's very minimal. There's a little bit of automation here. For those who are lucky enough to be sitting in the middle, you'll hear it. The others, tough luck. That's just your, when the organ solo starts and the organist does this little slide through so that it actually goes left to right in your mix, which is things like that, for taste, but I'm trying not to overdo anything. So now the session is open. I've discussed, I believe, all the plugins that I've used.
Well, wonderful. Marc, thank you so much for walking us through your process. It's been
You're
fantastic.
very welcome.